And good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Other Side of Midnight once more, one more time. When Art and I kind of conceived that we would do this in this time slot, I didn't really realize how appropriate that term would become, because many of the things that happen on Art's show we then can entertain or take umbrage with or pick up or put down on Art's show. And tonight, we're not going to do a lot of that. We're just going to do a little bit of that. I mean, I listened to the interview with John, and as the previous caller said, to the last caller to Art, I guess, it's really depressing in the 21st century to hear an intelligent, obviously educated person have wrapped themselves in a kind of a bubble. I mean, it kind of reminded me how NASA has reacted to the evidence, the overwhelming evidence now on all the imagery that's being posted of the entire formerly inhabited solar system. It's like they're acting like flat earthers in terms of our real history, what's really out there, what we have really photographed, and the stunning implications. I have a couple of announcements I need to make at the top of the show before I get to our guest. And for all of you who are calling on Skype or on phones, you can relax, because we're not going to take phones for another 90 minutes. And depending upon how the conversation goes with my guest, we may not take them then. It all depends on how things are flowing. So let me get to a couple of announcements. We've apparently, according to Rich Rowland, who is Keith's son and who is our webmaster at Other Side of Midnight. Remember, our website is othersideofmidnight.com. I just keep saying The Other Side of Midnight because that's the... Anyway, it's the idea. It's the thought that counts. So let me make this announcement. We've been having trouble, apparently, with email in terms of art submissions. As you know, on, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, we opened up a fan art gallery for artwork which has been sent to us. Some of it is pretty amazing. There's a couple of pieces up there now. There will be more after this problem was solved, so you can now email art submissions to the network. That's Digital Network. It's the Dark Matter Digital Network. Or you can send them to the Other Side of Midnight. .com, othersideofmidnight.com, or you can send them to enterprise.com, and I will get them and I will forward them over to Rich Rowland, and otherwise you should simply send them to the webmaster listed on othersideofmidnight.com, and that will, he'll then send them to me, and I'll take a look, and we'll see what goes up in the gallery, and I think that takes care of that. Okay, next item. Something really weird is going on around Mars. Is that news? No. If you've been looking at social media or looking at AOL or Yahoo or whatever, you've seen a story with photographs making the rounds. This so-called bizarre crab, an object that looks like it has tentacles or arms or whatever, and it's kind of orangish, and it's up in a dark alcove on the shadowed side of some rocks on a hill. At least it looks like rocks if you look quickly. To me, it's really interesting that everybody's making the big fuss about this crab, because apparently there is a concerted effort to get NASA to do something that they haven't really exhibited a lot of attention to during the Curiosity mission, and that is exhibit some curiosity. People are writing to NASA, apparently a lot of people, demanding that they turn around and go back to this object and go closer and take better images and do a real analysis to resolve the mystery. There have been so many objects in the last couple of years, 3 years, during the course of the Curiosity mission that have looked so bizarre and so amazing and so, anomalous, and NASA's driven right by them. It has resolutely refused to do any further investigation. Now, the question is, has it really refused, or has it publicly exhibited a lack of interest? And in fact, behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of imaging going on and other kinds of analysis, chem-cam, and maybe even drilling and whatever. The point is that politically, this seems to be one of those moments where if NASA accedes to public pressure and they go back and they look more closely at this, and it's really a bizarre object. They're going to find in its immediate vicinity, because I've now looked at the images that one of our Enterprise associates, Ron Gerbron, has been producing using his algorithm, which is able to kind of penetrate some of the imaging obfuscation that NASA puts into the images. And yes, they do that. We can prove that by the algorithms. There is a set of filters that he's able now to remove to see more closely what objects are in detail and get to the limiting resolution of the images. And yes, he's saying that not only is this object intriguing, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff around it on that hill that have such geometry, such intricate similarities to other objects, such symmetry, that it's really hard to see, if you're looking at this objectively, how any of those things, certainly the big things, can be rocks. So it would be really interesting and cool and quite dramatic if NASA were to publicly make a big fuss about acceding to public wishes and going back and looking, because some of my colleagues and I have been discussing what is going to be the precipitating event, the actual sequence of developments that will lead to NASA having to ultimately come clean that we live in a solar system filled with somebody else's junk, like an old attic, and they've been sitting on this data for a very, very long time. Okay, enough of the crab on Mars. Go to AOL, go to Yahoo, take a look, find the news story. It's there. It's pretty weird. So we'll just have to see how that story evolves. Final point. This Friday morning, the morning after the Thursday night debates, the major Republican debates, both the kiddie table debate, I love these names by the media, and the major debate in prime time over on Fox, we're going to have a show here. Apparently we're going to be broadcasting coincident with a whole bunch of other shows discussing the debate, except ours is going to be a very different discussion. I want to back up and look like, from 30,000 feet at the entire political process which is going on now. I'd like to look big picture at why the process seems to be almost imploding, and people are being put forward as credible candidates for the presidency who in other years you would never imagine would be accepted by the body politic. And in terms of polls, in terms of the so-called Trump effect, we're going to get into all of that. I've got two very interesting guests. I'm trying to inveigle a third, but I don't know whether he's going to want to play at that hour of the morning. But I will ask, and we'll find out, and you'll all find out together. I'm having my friend Joe Buckman, who is a politician. He actually ran for Congress. He's a libertarian. He was chairman of the Libertarian Platform Committee. I met him when I was asked to speak at the Libertarian Convention in Denver a few years ago, and had a very interesting time, fascinating time. My other guest is Robert Stanley, who was the editor of Unicus magazine. He's now living in Hong Kong, so we're bringing him in via Skype as we're bringing in our guest tonight. It's amazing what this technology is allowing us to do. I mean, I'm sitting here in my office with a few electronic doodads and twinkling lights and screens and all that, but this office has become, in essence, a broadcast studio, the equivalent to rooms and corridors and lots of space devoted to broadcast transmitters and other devices with glowing vacuum tubes that needed to be cooled 24/7 or they would burn the building down. We have come an amazing distance in 50 years. So on that note, in terms of distance and in terms of years, I want to introduce my guest tonight because I haven't known him 50 years, but it has felt like an immense amount of time because we've been through all kinds of interesting adventures together. My guest tonight is Paul Davids. Paul is a director. He is a writer. He is an absolutely phenomenal artist. He is a raconteur. I notice up on the Enterprise, old habits, the Other Side of Midnight website, othersideofmidnight.com. If you go to the top of our page, you'll see Paul Davids' name. You click on that. That takes you to his page. And there is this really cool picture of him in a tux, obviously at the Academy Awards. And we're going to talk about one of Paul's experiences at the Academy Awards because, oddly enough, it involved moi. And on that note, Paul, good morning and welcome to the other side of midnight.
Is it really morning yet, Richard? I'm sitting here. It's still the evening for me, but okay.
You're in California. You're in L.A.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm looking at my watch, and we are about 10 minutes past midnight, so I'll cede the first point in our discussion tonight.
So where should we begin? We have had such amazing adventures together. So many things we have accomplished, and some things we've tried, and we haven't yet accomplished them. And well, you, of course...
Why don't we begin where it began for us? I mean, it was 1994 when the film I produced for Showtime, Roswell, hit the airwaves.
Yep.
And it wasn't too long after that someone called me up and said, there's this fellow you need to meet, Richard Hoagland. And it was set up that we were going to meet at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, wasn't it?
That was actually our second meeting.
The second one.
Our first meeting was in a very cramped and overcrowded and incredibly hot tiny motel room with all of us lying on the floor and on beds and hanging out the windows while this little TV in the corner of the hotel room was playing your movie, the Roswell movie.
Okay.
And I crept in and kind of stood in the back because the floor was all taken. And there you were, shirt sleeves, holding forth in what would have been the commercials. You were doing all this backstory, and then we would go back to the film, and then there would be a commercial, and you would go back to narrating all the interesting stuff that happened. So, go ahead.
That July of 1994 was really kind of an extraordinary time for me with the Roswell movie being broadcast on Showtime.
Yeah.
And it
was a major political breakthrough.
Yes, it felt like a tremendous transitional moment, and it did influence so many people. I mean, now it's been on the air, maybe 100 times. It's been on the Sci-Fi Channel repeatedly, and other channels, and Showtime so many times. And people have seen the film. I think most are familiar with it. It's the Roswell that has Kyle MacLachlan of Twin Peaks, and Martin Sheen is in it, and Dwight Yoakam.
Paul, the more I look at it, I can't imagine you made it for less than several $1 million. I mean, the B-29 alone it's such a high-caliber film, folks. If you can't find it, go find it somewhere.
It was more than several million. No, Showtime wrote some very big checks to get that movie made as a tentpole for their summer. And I think the budget was around $6 or $7 million.
Well, it looks more expensive. It looks like maybe double that.
Yeah, I mean for a television movie, we had to really make those dollars go far.
Well, you were incredibly efficient, and I was so struck by how you made something that is inherently to a lot of people, even still, incredible. When you track through the story and you look at the humanization of Kyle and his character. And the agonizing, did it or didn't it, and was it real, and what did it mean? And in other words, you really brought out some of the basic questions around this whole phenomenology of, are we alone?
Well, we focused on the human side of the story of Jesse Marcel, the military officer who first became embroiled on this and then had to participate in the cover-up by saying, no, it was just a weather balloon. I think that... here we are all these years later, and I mean, it's more than 20 years now.
My
and,
God.
we haven't had the breakthrough we would have liked to have. As a matter of fact, what we've had is more denials, more new official explanations for what happened at Roswell. And none of it adds up. None of the official statements have ever added up. And, we're kind of swimming in quicksand as far as proving it is concerned. But my feeling hasn't changed at all in those 20 years. I've met a lot of the people involved, and I do think it happened. I do think that it was advanced technology that they got their hands on. I don't think it was made here.
So you differ rather dramatically with Joseph Farrell on that.
I haven't talked to Joseph Farrell. So
Well, Dr. Farrell thinks that this was a Nazi experiment that kind of went awry, and that it was imported by means of the Germans that we brought over at the end of the war. And of course, there's a huge database of work of documented studies, of their black ops projects, including into manipulation of gravity and stuff like that. That looks very much like the physics that we're looking at. So I've kept an open mind about Roswell all along as to who it could have been, because there's so many possible players now, including, divergent aspects of us, the human race.
Well,
or relatives from out there.
Yeah, I can't. With all respect to Dr. Farrell, I can't accept what he's saying, and I can't accept.
Well, but you haven't seen
so
his,
many of the
you
other.
haven't seen his evidence. You haven't seen the data.
Well, I've heard the story about the German scientist and the transplanted technology for a long time. I think one of the things that will never go away for me is the testimony about the creatures that were there. Mm-hmm. Having heard it firsthand from one of the old soldiers who was there, from having seen the affidavit of Walter Haut that was opened posthumously about the creatures, from having followed all of the testimony that Randall and Schmidt acquired when they were writing UFO Crash at Roswell, and then Tom Carey and Don Schmidt when they were writing Witness to Roswell, knowing that the head of the MPs referred to the creatures in a recorded phone conversation with Randall. No, and it just any explanation has to account for that, and Crash Dummies isn't going to do it, and neither are midgets from Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
so anyway,
let's not get mired there, because to me the importance of the film was that's what showed me what a consummate filmmaker you were. And so when we actually had a more formal meeting, and you were about to get to that story, because it turned out that you and I later shared the same agent.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And he wanted me to go to California and meet you.
That's what happened.
And
I remember now.
Yeah, and guess where you wanted to meet?
I probably suggested the Magic Castle, right?
No, that was our second stop that night.
Okay.
Our first stop was Forey Ackerman's house.
Okay, all right, yes. The great and immortal Forrest J. Ackerman.
Yep. Tell folks who Forey Ackerman was.
Well, he was one of the pioneers of proselytizing science fiction and bringing science fiction out of the back corners and the fringes of literature and C- movie making, and to bring it into the forefront as a major genre. He
was one of the founders of what was called First Fandom.
He was one of the first great fans, and of course that included his friend Ray Bradbury and Ray Harryhausen, who
did all the stop motion stuff in those films.
Yeah, and he founded, it was called, I think, the Boys Scientifiction League. Forey was born in 1908, so we're more than a century now. He died in December of 2008. He was 92.
He went from the space opera era, Doc Lensman, and then all the other, the 1940s and 50s fictions, John Campbell and his work at Astounding Magazine. I mean, he covered the entire history of science fiction. So the fact that you wanted to meet me at his house, I thought was kind of cool. You yourself got into this as from a science fiction perspective really early on.
Yeah, I was a kid with an 8mm camera.
Dangerous.
Making dinosaur and dragon films and entering the contest in Forrest J. Ackerman's magazine, which is called Famous Monsters of Filmland. By the way, his house, let's say a word about that. It was an 18-room mansion filled with memorabilia from science fiction films and literature, everything you could imagine he had collected. And Ray Bradbury referred to that house as the Fort Knox of science fiction.
Absolutely.
Well,
by the way, what's happened to it now? He died several years ago. What happened?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Very glad you asked. Richard, because it has so involved things that I've been doing recently. Those of your listeners who have followed my career and other films that I've made may know that a recent film of mine was The Life After Death Project. And this followed an earlier one I had made involving Forrest J. Ackerman called The Sci-Fi Boys. Well, The Life After Death Project dealt with very, very strange, inexplicable phenomena that happened related to Fari after he passed.
Which was, what, a couple of years ago?
Well, he passed in 2008.
Okay, well, that's a few. Okay.
December 4th, 2008.
Because I remember we would go and visit you at your other house up here in Santa Fe, and you had the most remarkable stories of things that happened that are really, to me to this day, kind of inexplicable. What, you want to go through that?
Well, I want to jump past that a moment and say that because these inexplicable things kept happening. Now, the house, you asked what became of the house. Of course, it changed hands. Fari moved to a smaller house about 8 years before he died. A lot of the collection was sold off even at that point, unfortunately. The new owner completely remodeled this 18-room house in the Los Feliz district of Los Angeles, and he still owns the house, but he had so much strange paranormal, we'll call it paranormal, activity happening in the house. I mean, there were apparitions, there were all kinds of reports, and some of it the owner experienced himself, and he found one incident in particular kind of frightening, but there were people witnessing the apparition of an older man there, of a woman. Of course, Fari lived there with his wife, Wen Dane, who passed in the house. So it wasn't tremendously surprising that these things were going on in the house after all the things that happened to me after he passed and others who knew him well. Albeit he was an atheist while alive, and he dismissed paranormal phenomena like he dismissed flying saucers, and it was all fiction for him. But he was a wily old guy with an incredible sense of humor, and with a twinkle in his eye and a wink, he said, "Look, if it turns out I'm wrong, and I wake up to some big science fiction convention in the sky," he says, "when the party dies down, maybe I'll drop you a line."
And then he
changed my life, you know.
Why don't you tell folks, we got a few minutes here before the break, tell them what happened. I mean, you have such a connection with Ackerman.
Yeah.
It was so, to me, Ackerman was like this historic, iconic figure. He began the organized field, but I never met him. I didn't communicate. I didn't correspond. You knew him, and
so I knew him from the time I was a child. Really.
Yeah.
I mean,
so the things that happened that are so indicative of that relationship, you got to share.
Well, for me, it started about a week after this huge tribute that was held for him at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. That weekend, there were two Canadian filmmakers who had made a documentary about him, who had playfully rapped on his crypt and greeted him and told him they were in town. They were going to show his movie about him at the tribute. And they both received the most extraordinary, what seemed to be communication from the deceased Fari Ackerman that very afternoon. The details of this are all in the Life After Death Project, which you can easily find, online. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel. I made it as a documentary, and then
is it part of our links tonight? We have at the very bottom, lifeafterdeathproject.com.
Yes.
So just go to Paul's page on othersideofmidnight.com, scroll down to the very bottom, and there is a link marked lifeafterdeathproject.com. Click on that. And the story of all the weirdness, and that actually this impelled you into doing a film about the bizarreness.
Yes,
you brought in handwriting experts and ink analysis and gas chromatography and some really cool high-tech Star Trek stuff to try to figure out. Go ahead.
The physical evidence of a document that was changed under impossible circumstances was studied by top chemists at two universities for 3 years, and they came away baffled. Dr. Gary Schwartz, by the way, of the University of Arizona Tucson, who has studied life after death for the last 15 years or so under the auspices of his university. With the blessing of his university, he studied mediums, scientific testing of signals to see whether it's possible that there would be signals from spirits. He's done all of this, and he became part of this process of examining the evidence of the Fari case, as I call it. And he and I have now written a book together, which we're hoping will be published in the next few months. We're still looking for the best title, but it's about these messages from Fari. Maybe that'll be the name of the book. I don't know, but we.
Are you tapping on your mic? Because I'm hearing a weird clicking.
Okay, I think I
okay, don't do that. This is such a good audio system that I can hear if your toenails are growing, so don't tap on your mic.
All right, I won't even let my fingernails grow. But here's the gist of it. What happened is that the owner of the house invited me in last March, to bring in we brought in about 12 people, university scientists, experts in various fields, and top mediums who had been vetted by Gary Schwartz and his team. And we spent 3 nights, 4 days at the Acker Mansion with a massive amount of equipment, experiencing the house with these mediums. We actually, I just adjusted my mic. We actually held a seance there, filmed all of that. I came away with 13 hours of footage. God. I'm still, interviewing everybody who was involved. Rosemary Guiley was there and was a very interesting contributor to this. And Suzanne Wilson, Jamie Clark are 2 mediums from Arizona. Are they both from Arizona? I think they're both from Arizona, or one is from New Mexico.
I'm sure Fari is absolutely amazed and boggled by this.
Well, he's amazed me. I never expected to be involved in this kind of...
Well, you remember that Houdini, you don't remember, but you remember the story that Houdini claimed when he was dying that he would try to come back if he could. From your analysis in this film, there's a really interesting case, Paul, that Fari has made contact.
Yeah, I really, honestly, in my heart of hearts, believe that with every ounce of my conviction after everything that I've been through. And regarding Houdini, who, is honored at the Magic Castle, they have a Houdini seance room there. Mm-hmm. Houdini was an arch skeptic. He was willing to believe if he saw the evidence. He never saw evidence that convinced him. And as a matter of fact, he went before Congress. He wanted laws against mediums who he said were charlatans that were bilking the public, taking their money on false pretenses. And so he was a crusader on the other side of this argument. He did leave, I think, some codes or something for his wife that, they met on his birthday over a number of years and were looking for the signal. Didn't come through. Looked very, very discouraging. However, there were a few things, you see, that really interesting to me on the day of the last seance they had.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let us hold it there. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will hear about the last seance. On the Other Side of Midnight, we are talking tonight about the other side. And we are back on the other side of midnight, and you were about to tell us a really interesting story that I wouldn't let you tell on the other side of the break, so go for it.
We were talking about Houdini and the last attempt that was made to contact him. And though the contact didn't happen, it was done in Los Angeles, and it only rained in one place in Los Angeles that day, and it was on the roof of that building where they were holding the seance. That was point number one. Point number two is that a number of years ago, on an anniversary of Houdini's death, there was a fire at the Magic Castle in Hollywood. And the firemen declared the fire put out. The exact moment they declared that was it corresponded with the exact time of Houdini's death. And as far as the damage in the Magic Castle, a lot of it was water damage from the hoses. And the waterlogging went into the dining area there that comes right up to the Houdini seance room. And it just stopped. The damage stopped right there, right at the door to the Houdini seance room. And that contains, his shackles and things that he escaped from and straitjackets, and none of that was damaged.
See, we would call that hyperdimensional resonance.
Whatever you want to call it,
Well, there's got to be a physics underlying this. I mean, you went to a lot of expense and a lot of trouble to make scientific tests of the evidence that Forey was trying to communicate.
I sure did.
I mean, it's an extraordinary story with real data, and I, as you know, love data. So to me, it's a compelling case that, the other dimensionality of consciousness of life does not end when we end this part here, because the rest of us is still broadcasting somewhere else. And Forey's data tells us this is not an inconceivable model.
And, he had this extraordinary sense of humor. He loved wordplay.
Well, tell us one of the stories, the piece of evidence, because that involves wordplay. And then we'll move on to what we wanted to talk about tonight.
Yeah. Well, Forey, in his wordplay, he loved to find words within words or names within words and highlight those. And sometimes this would show up in the captions of the photos of the monsters in his famous Monsters magazine, or even on the cover. Just to give you an example of what I mean, his name was Ackerman, and sometimes people called him Ack. And so if he wanted to put the word spectacular on the cover of the magazine, it would be and then you'd have Ack in big capitals, and then you'd have Euler, So he'd always highlight that name within a word. Now, what happened to me was a week after the tribute that I had spoken at, very heartfelt praise for the importance of this man and his place in cinema history. I was in our home that you referred to in Santa Fe, the vacation home. And we
call it the house up the street.
Yeah, it is. You've been there many times. And I was alone there, and it was near tax time. It was in March, and I printed out a document.
Yes. Oh, this is an amazing. Go.
24-page document of all my business meetings and key phone calls from the previous year, looking for things that could suggest deductions as you're doing your taxes. Now, I printed this out, give the print command. And then I left the house. I went to one of the Indian casinos there for an hour or two, and then came back. So when I came back, certainly the ink was dry on this thing. It had been printed out, 2 hours before. Mm-hmm. I stapled the document. I take it into the bedroom. I toss it on the bed because I'm going to climb into bed and look at this thing and take notes on it. Well, I went into the bathroom for like 5 minutes. And again, I'm alone in the house. The doors are locked. There's no one else there. And when I came out, my eyes fell on that top sheet, and it had been changed. There was a change.
The top sheet of the manuscript.
Of the 24-page document had 4 words of it that were neatly and precisely blacked out.
What?
Black, like the black spot, of the pirates, blacked out neatly,
you
precisely
mean like when you
targeted words, and still moist.
When you do FOIA requests for Freedom of Information, you'll get government documents, and they'll give you information, but they'll take a little razor blade and they'll cut out or blacken whole words or sentences or even paragraphs. Yeah. That's what this looked like?
Yeah, except it was at 2 different levels of blackness. It was 4 words. The words were spoke to Joe. You either pronounce his name Amode or Amode. Spoke to Joe Amode. And the word spoke to, you could still make that out through the blackness of the still moist ink. But the name, Joe Amadei, was absolutely completely blacked out. I couldn't even tell what the name was looking at it. I had to go to my computer file, open the original file, look at it again, and see that that's what it was. Now, at first, it was scary.
Well, hang on. How was the ink still wet?
It was still moist. You could see that it was still moist, that this had happened while I was in the bathroom 5 minutes before.
You printed this out hours before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This happened, the blackout of the words happened through some invisible agent while I was in the bathroom.
In that 5 minutes?
Yes. Absolutely, no question that's when it happened. And so at first, there was fear. There was definitely fear. I mean, I was... I was freaked. I'd never had anything like that happen.
But wait. You've been involved in this phenomenology for a long time.
Yeah.
You and I have known each other, and there's been some bizarre stuff going on in our relationship involving helicopters and stuff like that. Sure. Why would you be fearful at the vindication of what we all suspect and hope?
Well, I didn't take it as any vindication of anything at that moment. I just felt like there was an invisible presence there in the house. And I'm there alone in the house, and who is it, and what does it want, and why is it there, and why is it blacking out these 4 words? And is this like a death threat, or is this, something negative and harmful and fearful? And,
I really went there.
Oh, yeah, I called out. I called out to the spirit at that moment and said that if it didn't have my best interests at heart, to basically please get the hell out of there.
When did that change?
Well, then comes the dawn, and then comes the dealing with the mystery of why those 4 words. What does it mean? What's the message? Because it was clearly deliberate. The scientist, I brought this document to first the head chemist at University of Indiana, Purdue, who began the tests on it, Dr. Jay Siegel, and I hand-delivered it to him. I made sure the evidence was, chain of custody. It never left my hands. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to lose the track of the thought what did this mean? That was the thing. And then it dawned on me. It was days later, or it was a week later. It was like I puzzled over it. Because I had only had one conversation in my life with this man, Joe Amadei, and it was of no consequence. I had asked if he was interested in distributing something I had done.
What was his position? What did he do?
He had or may still have a DVD distribution company, I think, in New York.
Oh, okay.
And I was asking him about my film, Jesus in India. It was just an inquiry. I'd never met him before. So it had no consequence, you see. It was like, okay, if somebody wanted to send me a message, if something had happened to Joe Amadei, it's like, okay, why didn't you contact his family? Why are you contacting me? It made no sense. But here's what happened. I wanted to have some documents that showed how Fari Ackerman edited manuscripts. What style did he use? Did he ever completely black out words like that? Because I suspected a connection with him.
Why?
Because the tribute had happened 1 week before, and at that tribute, those 2 Canadian filmmakers both had contact from him. That was
so you were spring-loaded to.
So I felt like I was next. Because I had also made a film about Fari. I made the Sci-Fi Boys.
Right.
So it's like he's a publicity hound, He's going after the people that made films about him to say, yeah, there is a great big science fiction convention in the sky. Maybe this is but look, here's the key. Here's the key to the whole thing. I called up his caretaker, who was his closest friend and pal for the last 10 years of his life, a Hawaiian fellow named Jomo. And asked him, Joe, I was calling to ask him, Joe, have you got any documents that Fari hand-edited? Because I want to look at them. I didn't even have a chance to get out the words of why I was calling him when he cut me off, because Joe had organized the whole tribute for him, for Fari. And Joe said, Paul, hold on. He said, I got to tell you this. He said, I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in all this stuff. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that. He said, but I had an apparition, whatever you want to call it. Fari appeared to me, and it was so real. He said, just absolutely real. He came into my bedroom, and he said, and he spoke to me. And he said, pal, he said, you seen any good Hollywood tributes lately? And Joe said, Fari, what, you know, you were there, you saw it. What did you think? What did you think? And then Fari said to him, oh, it was fair. Well, this was a joke between the two of them because Fari had a guest book in the Acker Mansion that people signed, and somebody once signed what they thought of the collection, and they wrote down fair. And Fari said, fair? This is the greatest. How can anybody say that? Who is this person? So now he's saying to Joe that the tribute for him was fair. And then he breaks into a smile, and he says, no, pal. He says, that was the greatest tribute there's ever been. He said, that was the ninth wonder of the world. And that really clicked for Joe because why wouldn't he say the eighth wonder of the world? Well, the reason is Fari was science fiction. He was King Kong, devotee,
Yeah.
King Kong is the eighth wonder of the world. Fari would never insult King Kong by calling his own tribute the eighth wonder.
So in these little cues, now remember, this guy knows Ackerman. How do we know it just wasn't a dream?
Well,
that he was on his mind, he's done a tribute,
With Joe holds on to his skepticism by saying, look, maybe it was. He says it was like a super real experience that it could have been a dream just before waking, and then he opens his eyes, and then Fari is gone, and he's not there anymore. But he said it was more real than reality itself, and it was like Fari came and spoke to me. At that moment, I went into shock. Dick, I really
because now you've got three people that have claimed something.
No. Here's the reason: that the words that were crossed out were spoke to Joe Amodi. And the man I'm speaking to, who was his closest buddy, who spoke to him, is Joe Mo.
Oh.
And the name Mo is right in the middle of Amodi, just like Fari saying spectacular.
Yeah.
With the name Ack right in the middle of the word
spectacular. So
it was his trademark.
We could look back and say that he used what was on the paper.
Yes, to tell me who was calling.
To encode with his twist, tell you who really he was referring to, which was not Joe Amodi or whatever his name is. It was
Joe Mo.
It was Joe Mo.
He was telling me.
Spoke to Joe Mo.
He was telling me, Paul, if Joe thinks it was a dream.
That is.
I spoke to Joe Mo.
Okay, so you're
it's
in
just
shock
like somebody
now.
Dropping by on they're at a train station. They got to catch a train. They're very busy. They have time to just give somebody a quick note, pass it on to somebody. Oh, by the way, Paul, I spoke to Joe Mo. On my way. Goodbye. See you some other time. And I'm left with this ink blot.
This
and I'm
sticky
left with
ink blot.
3 years of investigation with scientists who can't duplicate the ink blot, who say that it defies science. Okay? People who've put their reputation on the line with these statements.
And this is all in the film, of course.
Yeah. It's Life After Death Project. If you leave out the word project, you'll never find it.
Right.
But here's the thing. There was due diligence in the scientific effort, and this was the beginning of the messages from Fari. It wasn't the one and only. It's where life started to get weird for me in this way, and it kept going for the years since. It's never stopped. There's always something that happens at a really completely unexpected moment that involves Fari Ackerman that makes it seem like he's still in touch.
Now, do you get the feeling that he wants you to do something? That he's trying to catalyze something with your career?
Well, I think he used me as a spokesman to let the world know about life after death. Mm-hmm. See, Fari was a futurist, a forward-thinking person. He was always about, time machines and whatever the inventions the future was going to bring. So he was so devoted to all of that and knowledge, really, that he would have had this great drive to let the world know that there is something that goes on. I mean, this is what, to me, this all makes sense, and I have the support of a lot of scientists in so many of these things that happen. I'll tell you one other incident. I have a plastic mask, a very lightweight mask of Fari's face that was on display in the Acker Mansion, along with a costume representing what he wore to the very first World Science Fiction Convention. I think it was in 1939.
Oh my God,
New York, and this was like a dummy in his Acker Mansion with this plastic mask representing his face. And at his estate sale, I acquired the mask. I had the mask. And it's in my office. And for, like 4 years, it had been sitting actually on top of a case, a 4-foot-tall case where I keep the Roswell alien. The alien that was in our movie, the prop. Right. Was alive in the movie. Fari's face had sat on top of that for 4 years. But the very day that I got the word that the Sci-Fi Channel was going to broadcast Life After Death Project, I went out to lunch for an hour. The house is locked. There's no pets in the house. My wife is at her office. There's nobody there. Mm-hmm. And when I come home, the mask of his face had moved 10 feet across the room. It had never moved in 4 years. It had always been on top of that cabinet.
And there was no fan and no window open and all that?
No, there was nothing that could have moved it. All the windows are closed, and there was and it was the only thing in the room that had moved.
Now, had it moved to some particular place in the office?
Well, yes, it moved from across the room into the wires of my hard drives on the floor, with the nose in the hard drive wire. Somebody said he's showing you he's got his nose in your computer. And that's happened too because of all the computer anomalies. But Dick, the long and short of it is, that the first life-changing event I had, I think, really was the saucer sighting of 1987 that propelled me to make the movie.
That was what I was going to ask you.
It was the first thing, yeah. And then this is the other thing. Then this happened, and life just hasn't been the same ever. It's fine. I mean, I love it. I love it when these things happen.
Well, when you say life hasn't been the same, are we talking a perspective or events or projects or?
Well, it certainly has changed my perspective because, as of the events of 1987 with the saucer sighting and then making Roswell, talking to all the witnesses, and then I took seriously the prospect that there is extraterrestrial life. We do interact with intelligence from elsewhere that's affected our history. So then I was aboard on that because before that, I'm an agnostic. What do you say? An empiricist. Definitely show me. I'm from Missouri, kind of thing.
That's the only way you can really figure something out. I mean, you can't. You can believe something if you want, but you and I have this similarity. Obviously, that's why we're friends. That we would like to verify.
Yeah.
The unusual.
So then years later, that was 1987. So then it was in 2009 that the incident happened, first with the ink blot, and then these things keep happening. So yes, it's changed my perspective in the sense that I'm also persuaded now that life does go on, consciousness goes on, and personality goes on. Because in that message from Fari in the ink blot that took the name within the name, we're seeing a manifestation of his personality and his humor and his cleverness.
Oh, the complexity is there.
He gave me a puzzle that I had to figure out, and I didn't get it at first. And I can imagine his ghost sitting on the sideline saying, "Paul, come on. When are you going to wake up? When are you going to figure it out?" It's like that.
Now, here's a bigger question. It's kind of like the Casablanca question. Of all the gin joints in all the world, why did he enter your bedroom and mess with your manuscript?
Yeah. Well, again, I knew him from the time I was 13 years old. The relationship started then when I was a contest winner of an amateur film for his magazine. When I studied at the American Film Institute, I visited his Acker Mansion. I would see him frequently. I would study and try to archive things that he had there. I made him a guest speaker at the American Film Institute. Then when we filmed the Sci-Fi Boys, on the anniversary of the great producer George Pal, anniversary of his death, I took Fari Ackerman to George Pal's grave and handed Fari the eulogy that Fari had read at George Pal's funeral. And I put him before a camera and I said, "Please read this eulogy again." Now, it was many, many years later. And Fari was much older, and death was approaching. It was very poignant, and I put this in the movie The Sci-Fi Boys. So that movie which went first. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was distributed by NBC Universal to countries all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really widely seen in.
It's such a memorable, wallowing in reminiscences. It's really well done. It's an amazing film. See, I wanted to get to your relationship to George Pal himself, because that's where the arc of Brookings, prepare the public for what's out there, I'm paraphrasing, really seems to begin in the works of George Pal, particularly when he adopted Heinlein's novel, Destination Moon. How did you wind up as a young film guy going to work with the science fiction giant of the time, George Pal?
Well, of course, my great admiration for George Pal started, when I was probably 8 years old. And when his movie, The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, premiered in Washington, D.C., a Cinerama movie, I was gifted tickets to go to that premiere by a news reporter for the Evening Star, their teen section, who had just done a story about the childhood movies that I was making that had dragons and dinosaurs and special effects. And she thought, boy, you should have these tickets. You should see that movie with George Pal's Puppetoons. And so it was years later when I was one of the first fellows at the American Film Institute. It was the Center for Advanced Film Studies in those days, in Beverly Hills, in this great mansion, the Doheny Mansion, that they had the school and the headquarters of the AFI there. And I approached George Pal then. The students could pick their favorite directors and producers, and the school got the prints of their movies, and we'd have a week of seeing, films by Robert Wise.
Oh, my gosh.
Different directors, and I chose George Pal, and we got his space movies. They were 4. There was Destination Moon, War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, and The Conquest of Space. And, of course, he did The Time Machine. In addition to his fantasies like Tom Thumb. We have to come back to Tom Thumb before our time is over. I need to talk about that. But so I called George's office, and I spoke to his lifelong assistant, Kate Griffiths, and told her who I was and said we were showing George's movies. Would George, please honor us with his presence to meet with the fellows?
Now, what year was this?
This was probably 1970. Was it 70 or 71?
Okay.
I think it was one of those years.
So we've landed on the moon.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's that backdrop, and you're saying, come and talk to us about...
Yes, you made Destination Moon. And I also invited Fari Ackerman to come, too. And those two men were friends. And Fari Ackerman in his magazine had spent years promoting the great works of producer and director George Pal. So I was in heaven that day at the American Film Institute having these two great men, Fari Ackerman, George Pal, together speaking to all the students. This was like a lifelong dream come true. And then when I finished my first student film, George came to the AFI, and it was just the two of us in the screening room, him sitting next to me. I mean, you have to imagine you're young, your early 20s, you have an idol that is like your greatest idol in the world.
Yeah, it's kind of like my first meeting with Cronkite at about the same age. And I wound up working. Yeah, I know exactly how you felt. Exactly.
And he watched my student film, and he liked it. He praised it. He said, I think you're going to make it. And then it was maybe it was a year or two after I finished at the AFI that George called me one day and said, would you like to work on writing The Hobbit for me? He wanted to make The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And of course I leaped at the opportunity. I brought my wife Hollis into the project. The two of us co-authored a treatment of The Hobbit for George. And the outcome was unfortunate. The timing was bad. George shopped The Hobbit to many of the major studios. I was at some of the studio meetings with him. and we were turned down everywhere. I mean, it was inconceivable to me that a producer director of George's stature with his accomplishments that people didn't leap to it, but we were asked, why would anybody care what a Hobbit is? They just didn't get it, and it was before its time. I told all this to Peter Jackson when he got the rights to make The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He was working on The Lord of the Rings when I interviewed him he's in the Sci-Fi Boys. And he's in it extensively. He's kind of the host of that as we sweep through the history of special effects in movies. And I showed him all these various rejection letters were sent to George Pal that nobody wanted to make The Hobbit. Now, of course, we didn't have the digital effects in those days. It would have been a different Hobbit. But now when you look at the wealth that The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, the two trilogies, have brought in, I mean, what are you talking? Probably more than $1 billion worldwide. I mean, it's staggering. When people don't have foresight to get something, they really don't get it.
Well, I mean, Hollywood is known for having incredible successes and absolutely abysmal boo-boos of executives who turned down a project that went on to make a couple of $1 billion. Look at the whole George Lucas thing.
Yeah, well, look at Mel. I think one of the best examples is was it Mel Gibson in The Passion of the Christ?
Yes.
Yes, the movie was finished. Of course, he'd made the whole thing in Aramaic. And he pitched it in Hollywood. He showed them the finished movie. Everyone turned it down.
Yep.
It goes on to make $1 billion.
Yeah.
And when you think of what all of those studios, I think about, okay, what all of the secretaries are working for and how much each one of them could use a $50 or $100 a week raise, and how many raises there could have been for how many secretaries if they said yes, to The Passion of the Christ. But they all said no, they didn't get it. And they didn't get Vincent van Gogh in his day either. I made a movie about that, called Starry Night, that they all rejected Van Gogh. They felt his work was just worthless.
By the way, did you ever see the Doctor Who episode on Van Gogh?
I heard about it.
Oh, I've got to send it to you. During the entire hour, all I could think of was you. All I could think of, because it's so well done, it's so artfully done, and it's not a cliche ending, and it's just something that you will really appreciate as someone who really appreciates Van Gogh. Let me take a pause here, and we'll regroup our forces. We're talking tonight or this morning, with Paul Davids, my director friend from Hollywood. And when we come back, I want to talk about the seminal impact that George Pal had not only on science fiction, but on NASA itself. We will return to the other side of midnight. And we are back. Yes, we are on the air. On the other side, Paul, you have gotten some refreshment, I believe.
Yes.
You are reassembled.
Yes.
So, let's look at George Pal. Who the heck was George Pal, and how did he wind up having this seminal influence at the dawn of our ability to actually go beyond the Earth, to go to the moon, to go into orbit, etc.?
Okay, well, first of all, he was a Hungarian whose name wasn't really George Pal. His name was George Mars.
You've never said that to me.
Actually, Marcinsak. Marcinsak. But Mars.
Don't do that. I just sprayed water all over 3 computers.
Yes, it was really his given name, and Pal was his father's middle name.
Ah.
His father's name was Georgi, I think it was, in the Hungarian.
Well, Hollywood did that to everybody in those days.
Yeah, so they shortened it to George Pal, and of course he was like everybody's pal, and he really was. He was one of the most wonderful human beings who ever worked in Hollywood. Well, of course, his career started in Hungary and in Europe, and with his Puppetoons and his stop-motion animation fairy tales, Tubby the Tuba, and even his fairy tales got a little political as the Nazis were on the rise, and he did some Puppetoons that were very anti-fascist.
This was in Eastern Europe.
He went to Berlin. He had a film company.
Oh my God!
Right in Berlin, and he left Berlin
with the Nazis chasing him.
Well, he got out of Berlin, and then what country did he go to next in Europe? I'm trying to remember, and I'm having a little gap. It may have been Czechoslovakia, but I'm not sure on that. Somebody will correct me on that. But the point is, his Puppetoons were noticed and known in America, and Paramount Pictures helped get him out of Europe. He came to New York, I think, to present them, and Paramount Pictures financed him so that he could stay and make these Puppetoons, and so he had escaped from the Nazis. And established himself in Hollywood with his wife Vjoka. They were married 50 years, but when he died, actually. But he married her very young. I think she was like a childhood sweetheart. They were married when he was around 20. He had studied architecture. He didn't know he was going to go into film. And his parents, who divorced, they were theater people, actors and stage. And George had a reaction against theater. He didn't want to work in that field, so he studied architecture and architectural drawings. And but what happened was that he became enamored of the technique of stop motion, which is animation with models or puppets. Mm-hmm. And he started with advertising, like cigarette commercials, where he would have dancing cigarettes. They'd have little feet, animate them one frame at a time.
We remember those in the 50s, don't we, everybody?
Yeah, he stayed in business that way. But now, he made Puppetoons for years, and he didn't get to make a feature film in Hollywood until he'd been there many years. And his first one was kind of a fun, silly family film. Rupert the Squirrel, Rupert the Magnificent. I forget the exact name, but Rupert was sort of a dancing squirrel, and it was in black and white. But what he really wanted to do was science fiction. He was a great visionary, and his first major feature film was Destination Moon. And I think, as you said, based on the work of Heinlein.
Yep, Robert Heinlein.
But also based on all of the preparatory research and thinking that was being done at that time.
Oh, there was
Werner von Braun. They were, they got to know each other, and George took advantage of everything he could learn about how we really would get to the moon.
Well, it was a tour de force of how you would get to the moon with an atomic rocket, which back in those days was pretty neat stuff. I mean, even the government wasn't talking about atomic rockets in terms of any general NASA usage, because this was like in the 50s. I think Destination Moon was made in 1950.
49.
50. Okay, so we're talking real pre-space consciousness. We're talking the era of Collier's, Chesley Bonestell, the artwork. Chesley went to work for George Pal to illustrate the moon sequences.
Yes.
For Destination Moon.
They created a spectacular soundstage. They didn't have a lot of space, so they had to use perspective techniques to make it look like that this lunar landscape was sweeping off into the distance. But imagine a very narrow stage where they had to do it all with paintings and flats of craters and mountains.
Last night we had a kind of a conversation with the audience about guests that Art had on previous to our show, Jay Weidner and Stanton Friedman, arguing about, did we go to the moon? Did Apollo really work? And I pointed out that art illustrators like Bonestell, the grand old man of space art, for films like Destination Moon, depicted a lunar landscape with all kinds of spires and crags and sharp edges, and it looked magnificent, but it's not the moon that's real. So if Apollo was faked, I asked rhetorically, why didn't they go with the Bonestell view of the moon as opposed to rounded hills and rounded craters and rounded everything, which is the reality because of millions of years of micrometeorite abrasion? That, to me, is the breakpoint, because the fictional line comes in through Bonestell, but the reality is the actual imagery that NASA has acquired, even if they haven't shown us all the imagery.
Well, the reality is we did go to the moon, and all of the mythology that we didn't. If you want my opinion, it's nonsense. But so we went in 1963.
Well, it's mine too. Yeah,
But
see,
but
what I'm
George,
intrigued with is sociologically, why do we have a whole group of people, like an entire generation, Paul, who do not believe we did this incredibly magnificent thing that we've done?
I don't know how many people believe that. I mean, I don't really want to go there. I mean, I think where I want to go is to say that George made that movie 20 years before he went to the moon. And
Yep.
he had a rocket which didn't have stages, as I remember. I think the whole rocket flies in one
No, it's a
piece.
single stage atomic.
Single
It
stage.
was basically a commercial industry effort, not a government effort, but an industry effort led by a bunch of industrialists. Was George Pell kind of free enterprise? Was he really into the American dream and
Yeah,
industry? And okay, so
I think
those
so.
are the folks that led us to the moon, and they had an atomic rocket like the Nerva rockets that Kennedy developed out at Los Alamos as part of their long-range effort. This was an atomic rocket, but it was developed by industry, not by NASA. NASA
Well,
didn't exist back in '49, of course.
no, no, it didn't. And now George did have a spacewalk.
Yep.
So he had that concept that they'd be spacesuits and people would have to leave the craft. I just want to jump ahead a little bit and mention that in his film The Conquest of Space, I think it was the first film to show a space station orbiting the Earth.
Yes, this was von Braun's wheel
Yes, yes.
at
So
a little
what,
over 1,000 miles up.
yeah. So whatever the forefront ideas were about space in those days, George Pal was the genius who seized upon them and convinced the studios to let him make at least those 4 films that involve space. One of them, of course, based on H.G. Wells and The War of the Worlds, which he updated to modern times as opposed to the
Oh,
original.
that is such a classic.
But what George was accomplishing in that short period of time, 1949, I think, what year was War of the Worlds? Was it 53?
I think it was 53, yeah.
Yeah, and then to have done the other 2 space films all around that same time.
When was When Worlds Collide? Was that 54, 55, somewhere around there? Because Destination Moon, which was, of course, totally different, was 56. So you've got that
Wait a minute. Which one are you saying?
Destination Moon, which was not George Pell. It was, but it was the next big leap for adult science fiction.
Wait a minute. George Pal's Destination Moon was 1949.
Right.
So what are you saying was 56?
Forbidden Planet was 56.
Oh, yes, you said Destination Moon. Forbidden Planet, yes. That was great MGM film.
So you've got this period of time where we've got pre-Kubrick people grappling with how to realistically portray the idea of taking human beings, going into space, finding amazing things.
And Dick, selling the whole concept to the public.
Yeah.
Through the entertainment, through the movies. So every time I think of his achievement just in that area alone, if he had done nothing more than those 4 science fiction films, he would have made his mark in cinematic history that had that influence on our whole space program. And everyone of our generation who grew up seeing those films, he was like the George Lucas of that day, was inspired by them to back and promote the whole concept of the space program.
Yeah. Well, so many engineers, so many scientists, so many kids like you and me grew up on that stuff, and it inspired us to think really big.
Yeah. Yeah. And George thought really big. He just had a vast mind and one of the most appealing personalities of anybody that I've known. Always positive spirited, the twinkle in the eye, and always able to take an idea or a conversation from where it was and move it up to the next level. It was just a delight to.
Now, did you ever have a chance to actually sit down and talk about his films with him, the background, the politics, the studio efforts, the PR, he was the guy that took and made into fiction, interesting fiction, real facts, as opposed to the bug-eyed monsters and the other ilk of science fiction which had been in that same time frame. He departed, like Kubrick departed decades later, but he departed into a very realistic, this is how it will be, and it sold.
Yes, and of course he always had a hard time selling it to the studio. There were always the problems with the people that had the power to make changes in his stories and his scripts. When Worlds Collide was...
I wanted to get to that.
And of course, When Worlds Collide is absolutely forward-thinking too, because it deals with the whole problem of the possibility of, whether it's another planet or whether it's a giant asteroid, of something striking the Earth and causing the destruction of life on our planet.
Okay, here's a question.
So he's dealing with that theme too.
Here's a question I have not been able to ask anybody, and you're in the seat tonight. You're in the hot seat, so I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
Of all the films that he did, my favorite is When Worlds Collide.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the final scenes in When
Sure.
Worlds Collide?
Sure, I'll tell you all about
Bonstell's
it.
mural.
Yeah,
Talk
they
about what that shows and the mural and what the history of the mural is.
Okay. Well, the travelers from Earth who have escaped the Earth, which is destroyed upon the collision with the other world, those who have escaped the Earth in a rocket ship, who land on another world that is somewhat Earth-like, when you, at the end of the picture, see them exiting the spaceship, what you're looking at is a mural of what that other world would look like. You're not looking at a three-dimensional reconstruction of it. Now,
Yeah, it was what they call a matte painting.
Well, actually, I think it may have been a large mural rather than a matte painting, which would be like on glass and much smaller.
But they had an active sunset, so you had to have something. So as the sun was rising and the rays were spreading,
yeah,
it was animated. It wasn't just a flat mural. It was a dynamic piece of.
So they added an element to it. But the point is, I know it was not George's intention that Bonestell's art would be the final version of what you would see in the movie.
Oh, really?
No, he intended to build a set of that world and to have it be completely realistic.
So when they walked out of the ship, they walked onto a landscape and distant mountains. And...
Yes. He wanted it to be completely real. The Bonestell painting was made to be, the model of what they were supposed to build.
Right.
But they ran out of money.
Okay.
And he was very upset that had to be the final shot of the movie because he wanted it to be better.
Do you remember what's on the left-hand side of that shot as the sun is rising center screen on the left by those mountains?
Isn't it like a citadel or something constructed?
They're pyramids.
Yeah.
It looks like Abydos or Abu Simbel in Egypt down at the cataract. It's a huge, massive monument cut into the cliff. And there are pyramids in the distance with sharp peaks. There are several of them. Like Bonestell was saying, with obviously the beneficence of George Pal as the director approving him to say it, this world that they fled to had an ancient civilization that created monoliths, and there were surprises over the hill.
Sure. Well, George had no problem with the concept of, ancient civilizations of other worlds. As a matter of fact, remember one of his films was Atlantis, the Lost Continent.
I don't think I ever saw that.
Advanced civilization on Earth.
I don't think I saw that.
It's one of his lesser-known movies. He always explained that they never really finished the script. It was during a writer's strike.
Oh.
And they wanted to get the movie made, so they went with the script that they had, even though everybody knew it needed rewrites. But he does have the destruction of Atlantis at the end of that movie, and he does have these great, death rays, these Tesla-like weapons and submarines. In other words, very advanced technology on the Earth.
See, what's interesting about the When Worlds Collide is this mural, this panorama, which the camera slowly pans across with alien-looking flowers and weirdly blue-green grass, and it's not Earth because of the shape of the plants. Mm-hmm. They're like bulbs, like candle flames frozen in multiple vivid colors and oranges and blues and greens. And then over on the left, you got these mountains with these. I looked and I magnified it. I captured it. I looked at it in Photoshop. Sure enough, there are prototypical ancient ruins, yet nobody says a word. Nothing in the film has led you to the idea that the refugee planet they finally wind up on, that they're going to save the human race, in fact, has an ancient civilization all over it.
It's a great point you're making, Dick, and I've just pulled something off my bookshelf here that I want to mention, because this is a paperback, a Fawcett book that I had when I was a kid. I don't know, I must have been 7 or 8 years old. It's called The Mystery of Other Worlds Revealed.
Boy, you keep things a long time.
Yeah, I have quite a collection. I have every Famous Monsters magazine, too.
I was going to say, Forey Ackerman has nothing on you.
No.
I've seen your den.
So this Mystery of Other Worlds Revealed on the cover has the spaceship from When Worlds Collide, and the in color. And the striking thing about that spaceship was the concept was that it would take off by going on a giant rail, kind of like a monorail, almost like a roller coaster that goes up a hill. And
no. It goes down a hill, then it arcs up a hill.
Yes, down. First it's down together speed.
Yep.
And then it swings up the hill.
And that all had to be done in actual sets, miniatures.
Yes, they built that.
There was no CGI in those days.
No, it was fantastic. Now, this Mystery of Other Worlds Revealed, I mean, this must be from the early 50s. And it has a whole section, Spaceships Are Already Here. It has scenes from Destination Moon. It has the Bonestell painting that you're talking about, but it also has a whole section about speculation about aliens and alien life, and will we find aliens in the galaxy?
And what was Pal's relationship to this book?
Well, they just chose his movies to put into this, but this was like the best thing you could find in that day if you wanted to read about UFOs and speculation about what the aliens would be like. And I think they had drawings in here from the section here called A Journey to the Moon. And they had drawings of what aliens might be like, speculating on what would a creature look like that lived on Jupiter.
And what was the publication date of the book?
They have From the Moon to Mars. Let me see if I can find it here because I've been going by memory. Let's see. Looks like it's 1952.
Oh, my. That's the year that Arthur Clarke wrote Profiles in Space.
No, wait a minute. Hold on. Something in here was, because it has articles, so one of the articles was 52. But let's just say this was early 1950s.
Okay. Well, that was the heyday when there was an effort to get us off the planet into space.
Exactly. And, this is what dreaming kids would read. Listen to the table of contents. Spaceships are already here. The physical problems of space travel are being solved. A journey to the moon, from the moon to Mars, life on other worlds, communication with other worlds, the expanding universe, space travel is a serious business, space travel in history, fiction, and film, possibilities for an invasion base on the moon, a case for flying saucers, investigation of the Carolina saucer. So this was the best of its time, and this was George Pal's time, his heyday, and I guess
look, based on this beginning, based on this foundation, based on the imaginative inculcation of the restless urge to go out there on the part of millions of kids, how come we don't have a moon base tonight?
We've been cheated.
Yeah. The question I'm looking at, and I'm going to use this show to try to explore, when did we diverge? When did our timeline diverge from where we were going to where we are now? And can space and what's really out there in the solar system, if we somehow make it public, can we get back on the right timeline? Because without space in the equation, we're stuck on this little spit of dust, Paul. I do not see a very rosy future for humankind.
No, the risks for human future have never been greater than they are now. So it's very, very precarious time which we live in. It would be really productive for the human race if we could establish some bases on other worlds in our solar system, because it doesn't appear that we have the means to get to other solar systems yet, even though Ben Rich once made the comment that we do have the technology to take ET home to the star.
Yeah, someone mentioned Ben Rich last night, and there are various interpretations of what he meant. Like someone actually said, I think it was Stanton Friedman said, well, the way you could interpret that was if you give us all the money we want, we'll have the ability to take E.T. home. He kind of like was.
Yeah, but that isn't what.
That's not what he said.
What Ben Rich said.
No.
He said we already could.
We already got it. Well, see, Friedman was trying to project that all these amazing space drive technologies that are required if you're really going to inherit the solar system and beyond, that they don't exist, and that NASA now in the so-called EM drive discussions, I guess you've seen something of that in the press, they're just beginning to look at the problem of reactionless thrusters, reactionless space drive mechanisms, non-rockets. And
they are putting some money into that every year, aren't they?
Yeah, just a little bit. It's incredibly. Look, most of this has been in the black ops world. Most of this has actually been done in the 40s and 50s, as Dr. Paul LaViolette has documented in his brilliant book on anti-gravity and all the secret R&D projects which have actually developed it. So the idea that while this is all going on behind the scenes, people like Pal are being encouraged by Hollywood to actually produce films that will educate the public in front of the scenes. I just find that confluence of history really interesting, and then it was stillborn.
Yeah.
I mean,
he wasn't encouraged by Hollywood. He was encouraged by people like Wernher von Braun, but he had to.
But he had to get a studio to fund it.
Yes, and it was uphill battle all the way. Every single one of his movies, they were always underfunded, and I think he won that battle around 16 times. And then toward the end of his life, it was very tough to get a picture going. He had a couple of failures toward the end of his life. He made a film called The Power, and then his last film was
that about telekinesis?
I think so.
Okay.
And then there was, of course, he made the film Houdini prior to that. But his last film was Doc Savage, The Man of Bronze, which was based on the pulp fiction series. He wanted to do a whole series of Doc Savage stories, but the first one didn't take off. It didn't become another Batman, So, and that was it. That was his last film, and he passed away of a massive heart attack in 1980. He had been warned that he should consider a heart bypass operation, and in those days it was riskier than it is today, to say the least. In 1980, I think that one of the reasons he decided not to. Someone mentioned to me that Rod Serling did he die on the operating table having a.
I know he was a very heavy smoker, and I don't remember. I thought he died of cancer. I didn't know whether he died.
No, I think it was a heart attack,
okay.
And I think somebody said, that he didn't survive a.
So that was a kind of a cautionary tale for Pal.
Yeah. So,
that's a shame.
But George was he loved deep sea fishing, going after big marlin and things like that, and he a few months before he passed away, he went to New Zealand and was doing deep sea fishing, which he shouldn't have been doing, with his heart. And he passed away in he passed away in May of 1980, and I always regretted that I didn't see him one more time then, because I had sent him a Christmas card. He sent me a Christmas card when he got back from New Zealand, and I wanted to see him, and it was around that time I had a disastrous fire in my house. And I was dealing with that and insurance. Now, George also at one point had a disastrous fire in his house where all of his memorabilia was destroyed.
Oh, my God.
All of those models, Destination.
Oh, priceless.
Worlds Collide, all of his Puppetoons.
Oh, that's a shame.
He lost everything, and it broke his heart, but he was the kind of person who had the strength of character to, pull himself up from that and go on. Like the spider that said its web destroyed.
Well, of course, he had the films. So
yes.
He saw the end finished product and the way they were supposed to be used, so it's not like there was total, disaster.
Yeah. But, of course, in those days, there were no videos, so people didn't really own their own films. It wasn't like you could show it to friends in your own living room. The studio had the films.
Well, you could get a projector and a print and do that.
It wasn't easy, But anyway, he went through that fire. I went through a fire then, and so I didn't call him. And then I heard that he had died. And I went to the funeral, and it's out near Marina del Rey. I think it's a Catholic cemetery near Culver City or in Culver City. And Fari Ackerman in the chapel gave the eulogy, and so many people from Hollywood were there. It was so sad. I mean, just the loss of this brilliant man. It was terrible.
But Paul, he changed history. He infused an entire generation with a burning desire to know what's really out there and to see a way to basically make it happen.
He did.
His life was not wasted at all. I would not feel sad at all because he got to do what most people don't get a chance to do. We're going to pick up on that theme, doing the things that you normally don't get a chance to do until you take a chance when we come back on the other side of midnight. And we are back. I'm speaking this morning with Paul Davids, an eminent film director in good old Tinseltown, Hollywood. Paul and I have known each other many years. And in fact, we got together, and after we'd met and we realized that we were, separated at birth, we came up with this really kooky idea, which was, why don't we do a movie about Cydonia? Take it away, Mr. Davids.
Well, Cydonia, the location of the monuments of Mars, and the book that you had written about the face on Mars image, and so we pitched that. Well, first we wrote a screenplay.
Yeah, and tell them how we wrote the screenplay on the literally steampunk computer that almost did use steam to print out versions of the script. I've never seen such an archaic. It was almost like working with an abacus.
Well, we did it together. As I remember, we were in Sedona together for
at your little rental cabin your house where you rent out, and it was gorgeous Sedona, surrounded by rocks. Remember the first afternoon when we arrived, when I arrived, and you came out on the porch, and it had just rained, and you turned around, and you said, "Look at that," and I saw this gorgeous rainbow.
Yes.
In the sky, like an omen, because we were going to spend this intensive weekend writing a script about Mars and Cydonia.
Yeah, we were going to, and it's ironic, we were writing about Cydonia Mars in Sedona.
In Sedona, yes. Sedona.
But as I remember, we also saw some very weird lights in the sky one night while we were working on it. We were going to write that screenplay in a few days or a week, and then 2.5 years later, I think we had a draft of it that we liked.
Well, I mean, what came to our rescue was something called email.
Yep.
And we were able to ship, I remember you having me go out and get something called Magic Movie Screenwriter.
Yeah, Movie Magic Screenwriter.
Movie Magic Screenwriter, and which I installed. And then, of course, we could ship copies of the script and each make changes and then send the changes to the other guy, and then he would read it and then make changes. And I remember many of my changes wound up on the cutting room floor.
Well, what happened, we never quite got to a cutting room because cameras never rolled on the project, but we did have the most wonderful contract to make the movie for RKO, the studio that made the original King Kong.
Yep.
Tom Mount at that time became a creative director for RKO Studios, and he was pulling projects in. I think he started around 6 or 7 pictures in development, including our Face on Mars project. And, they wanted a rewrite, and they wanted to bring in their favorite young writer, Jason Hall.
Jason Hall. Now, flash forward the film and tell everybody who Jason Hall is.
Jason Hall was the writer of American Sniper. He was just nominated for an Academy
Award. We had him on our picture.
We had him.
And they wouldn't put it on the damn screen.
No, we went through over a year of development, several drafts at RKO, but they shut down the whole – it wasn't just us that they were singling out. They shut down the whole division for developing new movies at RKO all at the same time. So as I understand it, all of the projects that Tom Mount brought in at that time, 6 or 7 of them were all axed.
I mean, when you got me and you together with a movie with real money, real advance money, real script writers, real discussions of locations and scenes and budgets and all of that stuff.
We were a blink of an eye away from making the face.
We were going to make the Face on Mars,
Yeah.
and what I kept thinking about, and the reason why the subtitle of this show, The Other Side of Midnight, is Radio with Pictures, because that's the slogan of RKO. And what we're doing is we are creating a whole new art form of radio, Paul, where we connect the internet, where you have pictures, things you can focus on as you are talking with someone, having a conversation, and using that ineffable ability of the imagination to create the pictures that we don't have to supply as a television stream because you can do it better yourself.
That's really cool.
So I've taken this idea of our wondrous RKO experience. I mean, during that whole trip, and it was a trip, I just kept thinking of Orson Welles and how the studio where Orson Welles made Citizen Kane wanted to make our movie.
Yes.
And it came so close.
We had 40-page contracts. We were going to produce it together.
Yep.
And share the, maybe it was executive producer credit. Hard to remember. And I had a contract to direct it.
Yep.
And, you know, our script was optioned, and Jason Hall, you know, so talented and went on to do incredible things. So it was one of those dreams. It's just shame. It didn't.
Well, but, you know, as they used to say, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. So What are we going to do now? We've got such stunning data now, such compelling information. And NASA
what we're going to do is we'll have to make a movie about Pluto that now has all those craters with science fiction names.
Oh, you've got to tell everybody about this. This is kind of the quintessence climax of our conversation tonight, because we fast forward the film from the 40s and 50s, George Pal, up through Forbidden Planet in 56, which really changed the entire approach, paved the way for Kubrick in 2001. And then all of the other films that have grappled seriously with some really extraordinary sci-fi concepts. Now we get to 50 years exactly after we've flown by Mars on Mariner 4. We fly by Pluto, and we find, because I sent you the maps, that the plans are for the New Horizons team to name all the features on Pluto and Charon, its big moon, after horror or cult classic or science fiction characters, names, locations, places, novels, films. It's all there at the edge of the solar system.
You know, I've got some of the names. Mortar Regio.
Yes.
We're talking about, is it Charon, the moon? Is that the way
Charon.
you pronounce it?
Spelled Charon. Pronounced Charon because it was really...
Charon.
Yeah, the guy who founded...
Moon of Pluto.
It's the big moon of Pluto. Pluto is 2/3 the size of our moon. Charon is half the size of Pluto. Orbits 12,000 and change miles away. It's a double planet system. They actually go around each other. If you go to Enterprise Mission, Paul, and click on the Pluto... The Last Encounter banner at the top, that will take you to our Pluto page. Click on the first link on the Pluto page.
Okay, and
go to Enterprise, go down to the Pluto Last Encounter banner, click on that.
Well, I can't do that now as we're talking because of my setup with my computer.
Oh, okay.
But the point I wanted to make is, Mortar Regio on Charon, named after the region ruled by the Dark Lord Sauron of Lord of the Rings.
Yes!
And then we have Ripley Crater, named after the character Ellen Ripley from Alien.
Yep.
And Nostromos Crater. That was the name of her spaceship. We have Star Wars characters named there. We have the Vader Crater. Hey, that even rhymes, Vader Crater. We have Organa Crater. Of course, it was Princess Leia Organa.
Yep.
Skywalker Crater.
Of course.
By the way, let me get in a plug and say that my wife and I wrote 6 of the Star Wars sequel books for George Lucas.
Don't you love this segue?
I love to be able to segue to that. So if you ever read The Glove of Darth Vader, or you happen to come across The Lost City of the Jedi, or Zorba the Hutt's Revenge, or Mission from Mount Yoda, or Queen of the Empire, or Prophets of the Dark Side.
Just to name a few.
Just to name 6. You're reading our Star Wars books. Then we've got Nemo Crater for
The captain of the Nautilus.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Oh, I know what I'm going to stop you there for a second. What was the relationship between George Pal and Walt Disney?
They were friends.
Because at the same time, Disney had hired Von Braun to do these television things.
Yes.
That really helped sell, together with George's films and his TV stuff. Americans were sold on going into space.
I think there's a famous photo of Walt Disney with George Pal and Walter Lantz. Walter Lantz was another great friend of George Pal, and he was the creator of Woody Woodpecker.
And Woody Woodpecker was a major player in Destination Moon and explaining how rockets can work in a vacuum.
Yes, and that was because of the Walter Lantz friendship. So yes, George was friends with Walt Disney, and they had sort of to settle out something between them because George had wanted to make 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Of course, Walt Disney wanted to make that. Walt was also, I guess, thinking of War of the Worlds, and George wanted to make War of the Worlds. So, it was sort of a trade-off, and they shook hands, and George made the War of the Worlds, and Walt Disney made 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So that was.
So it was kind of like an arrangement between Lucas and what's his name, Spielberg.
Spielberg, yeah, it was. And it's good that George ended up with the War of the Worlds because that was the aliens, And,
he did it. That is just such an interesting film for the 50s overlay. The geologists, the town, the way people approached the idea of the other. It's a classic condensed in time, like Time Traveler, but it's really a microscopic version of the book, which was also collapsed in time, but it works. You really suspend disbelief. So even though the film time is only 90 minutes,
roughly,
it feels like weeks or months have gone by till the ending. It's very effectively done for the 1950s. And those spaceships. What happened to those gorgeous spaceships? Did they get destroyed in the fire?
I'm not sure with most of them. I know that there was one of them that Fari Ackerman owned, and it was part of his collection. And when I rounded up Fari Ackerman that day to take him to George's grave to film him rereading the eulogy, we brought the War of the Worlds war machine with us, and we put it on George's grave and him read it. And that piece of film has become kind of an iconic piece of the Sci-Fi Boys, which the Sci-Fi Boy, it's called that because, Fari invented the term sci-fi for one thing, and it spans the history.
Not the way the network spells it, I presume.
No, well, the network changed the spelling. Or they used to be spelled SCI-FI, but they decided to give their own stamp to it, so they changed it to SYFI.
Branding.
Yeah, branding. But with the Sci-Fi Boys, the concept was that in the history of special effects, that one generation influenced another, and certainly my generation, the baby boomer generation, all the filmmakers that went on to become important in the genre, started making films when they were kids with 8mm cameras. And I collected a lot of those 8mm films. And in the Sci-Fi Boys, you see what Dennis Muren, who has 9 Academy Awards, you see what he was doing when he was 10 years old.
Well, my friend Dick Bertel and I did this show 50 years ago in July of 1965. We covered in a 5-hour radio special originated out of the Museum of Science in Springfield, where I was head of the planetary department, astronomy department. And we did this live broadcast with long lines to JPL and with guests and eventualities and actualities. So we were able to do another show on the 50th anniversary on the encounter with Pluto, exactly 50 years to the night since we flew by Mars for the first time. And then I had Dick on afterwards, I guess a couple of weeks ago or a week ago. I've had so much mail from people appreciating his contribution to the early history of radio and the middle history, the so-called golden age. you're in a position, Paul, to really give the same perspectives on the early years of film in Hollywood that created the science fiction genre that we now see everywhere. Because before then, it didn't exist.
No, it didn't, and it was ridiculed.
Totally.
It was dismissed. You know, a student caught with a science fiction novel in the classroom. It was like, you know, as if you were reading pornography. I mean, it was belittled, and when Fari Ackerman and Ray Bradbury had their science fiction boys club, well, they met at Clifton's Cafeteria in Hollywood, which is being remodeled now. It's being refurbished, but that was the original meeting place. They were ridiculed because they were these fools who thought that we would get to the moon in our lifetime.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
so
those
foolish.
Those were the days when the New York Times printed an article explaining why space travel would be impossible, because the blast from the rocket ship in space would have nothing to push against.
Yep. Well,
so
that was a little earlier. That was when Goddard was doing his stuff in the 20s and 30s. But
okay,
same.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
I'm talking about the 30s when I'm
okay.
Science Fiction Boys Club at Clifton's.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was before it, and what Ackerman did, and George Powell, and of course Ray Bradbury, and they ushered in science fiction, and they made it respectable.
And they convinced an entire generation of kids to either go into the sciences, into engineering, create NASA, go to the moon, and then hide everything, which is the part that I really don't understand. Look, we've got a little bit of time. Why don't we try to take a call or two and see what somebody out there thinks to ask that I haven't thought to ask tonight.
Let's do it.
So if you want to call us at the other side of midnight, you dial 505-796-8802. 505-796-8802. The number is on the othersideofmidnight.com website, or you can dial our Skype name, which is Enterprise Mission, and you can reach us directly. And we were being inundated with calls earlier, but I guess they're all so fascinated by the story that they don't want to interrupt. So what else do we want to hit tonight in our first conversation of many yet to come?
Well, I'll tell you.
Oh, you've got some projects. I want you to talk about your secret project.
Well, my latest project. I've been working on it the last year. It's called Marilyn Monroe Declassified. And it deals with what we've learned about Marilyn Monroe from declassified FBI documents. There's a particular CIA document, sheds a lot of light on her. People don't realize that she was under the spotlight of the FBI, the government, after she married playwright Arthur Miller.
Why?
He wrote Death of a Salesman. He was, let's say, communist-leaning. He was called out by the House Un-American Activities Committee, asked to name names, didn't cooperate, censured. He was a Jewish intellectual. Marilyn converted to Judaism, actually, when she married him, and this is after her marriage to Joe DiMaggio. She attracted the attention of government. She was under the spotlight. Her phone was tapped. You know, she's being bugged. She's being spied on when she takes a trip to Mexico. And a lot of these documents that talk about this have come into they've been declassified. Mm-hmm. So I used that, and then I interviewed about 20 people for this movie, who some who knew Marilyn personally, and scholars. It makes a really intensely interesting film. I've only had one public showing of it so far, but because I'm still polishing, I'm taking a few minutes out of it, but it's very close. We're next going to show it. There's a conference coming up in Laughlin in mid-November.
Oh, okay.
It's Paola Harris's conference, and that is starworksusa.com to find out the details of the conference. We're going to show it there. We're going to show Roswell.
How long is the film?
Well, it was 99 minutes. Now it's down to 94 and a half minutes, and I'm trying to see if I can get it to an even 90. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's it's about an hour and a half, a little over.
Any network discussions about airing on a national broadcast?
We're having some discussions. here and in Canada, but I don't know the answers to that yet.
Well, what would you look your history and your
but wait,
background?
let me interrupt. Let me interrupt to say that we do have a website where you can learn who's in the film and a lot of details, and it's MarylandDeclassified.com. We have a trailer there too.
Okay. Well, by all means.
And one of these days.
And you can go to the othersideofmidnight.com webpage, scroll down to the bottom, and these links are on Paul's page.
One of these days we'll have the DVD available, or you'll be able to stream it.
I can't wait to see it. Because the question I was going to ask was, how the hell did you get interested in Marilyn Monroe's story? Other than, celestial bodies, I can't quite get the...
Well, there are a lot of reasons, but the CIA document, which has been authenticated through work of Don Burleson using the Freedom of Information Act and doing appeals using the document, the CIA accepted the validity of the document for the appeal. The document mentions some of the secrets that Marilyn was told by President John F. Kennedy, classified things that she had no business knowing about. It included their being in league, the CIA, with the mafia at that time in the attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro. And the document also mentioned her awareness of the president's visit to a secret Air Force base for the purpose of examining things from outer space.
This is in the document.
Yeah.
So all these rumors that she was killed to keep her quiet because she was going with both Robert and with John.
The document was signed the day before her death by the man who was at that time, in 1962, CIA head of counterintelligence, James Angleton.
Oh, James Jesus Angleton.
Yeah, he signed the document.
A huge name in ufology.
He signed the document the day before she died. And as a matter of fact...
now, how do we get this? Was it just part of a declassification, or did somebody leak it?
I'll tell you in just a moment, but I just wanted to say first that officially they say her death was
suicide.
August 5th, which was yesterday.
Yeah.
Actually, it was the 4th. But yes, and they said probable suicide, but it was that was not.
Well, there's all kinds of weirdness around ambulances coming and going and bodies shifting around, and I mean this is
a lot. There's a lot of red herrings in all of that. I will tell you. You have to. I've spent a year sifting through it, and there is a very clear path to explain what happened. But you asked a specific question about the CIA.
I asked, how did you get into this? How did you get intrigued?
Well, I was intrigued by the document because the mention of the visit to the air base, it
and the outer space stuff. Okay.
Roswell. So that there was a connection between Marilyn and Roswell. Also, her connection with JFK. Anyone who picks up a copy of Profiles in Courage, JFK's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, and reads the preface, will see he credits Dr. Jules Davids of Georgetown University with contributing materially to several chapters. That's my father.
Oh, my.
He was a historian who wrote the first drafts, preparatory drafts of 5 of the 9 chapters for Profile of Courage. Jackie Kennedy was his student. She introduced him to her husband, Jack Kennedy, and my father was very involved with the origins of Profiles of Courage. So between my Kennedy connection, my connection to Roswell, I was very intrigued. And this document was never officially declassified, apparently. It was put into certain hands through a CIA archivist. And once it hit the Internet, it was so public that there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. And people did question, well, how do we know that this is real? The Majestic Documents site does a wonderful analysis that shows how the form of it is correct. And
this is the Wood site, father and son?
Yeah. Any questions that have been asked about the document have been well explained. But the key proof of the validity is the fact that Donald Burleson, who wrote a book called, I think, UFOs and the Death of Marilyn Monroe, he used the document to apply under the Freedom of Information Act to the CIA to get the actual transcripts of the wiretaps that are referred to in the document. And it went through several steps. You see, it wasn't kicked back. They said we did due diligence. We couldn't find the transcripts, but you can appeal it. And he appealed it, and they accepted it on appeal based on the document. And as we all know, the CIA would not accept something like this on appeal unless they considered the document legitimate.
No, this is a major smoking gun.
Yeah.
Now, how do you know that that reference, which is kind of vague, references Roswell as opposed to other ET stuff?
Well, in the conversation, it was a wiretap of a conversation with Dorothy Kilgallen,
the journalist who was found mysteriously dead from pills and alcohol.
Who knew Marilyn Monroe, and they both had some interest in flying saucers at that time. And in the wiretap of the conversation, it's Dorothy Kilgallen, when she hears about the visit to the secret air base for the person she's having the conversation with, she's the one that says, "Oh, I bet you that refers to the flying saucer incident, the crash in the Southwest."
She says this to Marilyn.
No, she's not speaking to Marilyn in this. She's speaking to somebody else who's telling her what Marilyn has been talking about.
Oh, okay.
So it's Dorothy Kilgallen's speculation that information would mean Roswell. Doesn't prove that it is Roswell, but you can imagine these people all being wiretapped and listened to.
Yep.
CIA at that time.
But I will have to imagine it another time because we have reached the end of the program, Paul. 2 hours, just like that.
We're out of time.
I want to thank my guest this morning, Paul Davids. We will obviously have more conversations and more imaginative forays in honor of Forey Ackerman into the other side of midnight.